So here are two of the Heathkit GC-1005s, or are they? One of the problems over the years has been that we are all obsessed with the Panaplex displays, but these have become more and more and more unobtainium. They do eventually wear out, I'm told, although again, one of my units, my original unit, has been running continuously for, well, I guess over 50 years now, or half a century. And it still works just as well as it ever has. With the only thing I've ever had to do to it is to shut it down when I moved or redecorated my room, or there was a power failure, or the only ever maintenance I ever did on it was to recap it. Apart from that, it's worked flawlessly. But I've always asked myself, these displays will eventually wear out. Possibly in the rest of my lifetime. What am I to do? Is there some way I could replicate this? Well, let's plug both of these in and see what happens. So if you know anything about the Heathkit GC-1005, you'll know that the one on the right came up normally with all eights, and that means it has lost power because it was non-volatile. And to set it, basically flip this switch, you set it to some time, and there's little slide switches on the bottom, and then off, when you slide the thing back, off it goes. The one on the left, on the other hand, is showing the current time, but I didn't have to set it. It apparently was non-volatile. How come? And you notice the displays look very, very similar to each other. Um, Spoiler, the one on the left does not use Sperry 352 displays. Let's open them up and see what I've created on the left. So I've already removed the screws holding the case top in, and if you ever were curious, these are the screws. They are rather long, black self-tapping screws. If you're interested in how to properly remove and especially reinsert these screws, I refer you to Fran Blanche. But let's take the tops off. So starting with the genuine GC-1005, it of course looks like so, and here's its little front panel, and there is the inside with the SP-352 two-digit Panaplex displays. And again, I'm not going to go through how this is built or rebuilt, other than to point out that again, the only thing I ever did to this was to recap the three electrolytics which are in the kit. Well, actually, there were two electrolytics. One was a dual section, and one was a single. So these were replaced by three beefy electrolytics. But that's all that's ever been done to this. Oh, and occasionally cleaning up this wiring. So that's basically a stock GC-1005. Let's look at the what I call the GC-1005Neo. Opening the GC-1005Neo, there we go. A couple of things. First of all, its front panel is nothing more than a piece of lucite and a gel, a piece of transparent colored material. More on that in a minute. Opening up the rest of it, here's what we find. Notes to myself, and basically completely different set of parts. And this was basically my interpretation of completely remaking the GC-1005, but with modern parts and yes, an Arduino Pro Mini. So here's the original Heathkit speaker. We still use that for the alarm. And this being a prototype, here's the Arduino Pro Mini. Here's one of those DS3231 Chinese real-time clock modules with a lithium coin cell, and that's why it continuously keeps time even when it's unplugged, as it is now. a tiny little universal voltage 5-volt power supply here fits right here, the obligatory fuse, and then the slide switches, which are basically unchanged from the GC-1005. Now, what you've been wanting to see, moving on to displays, the displays are these, and I'll talk more about these in a second, but they're built onto a piece of protoboard, and there's basically three 2-digit LED displays, and they're driven by an Analog Devices MAX 7219 7-segment driver. So this one chip handles not only these all 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 digits, it also handles this LED, which mimics the GC-1005's AM/PM indicator, and it communicates to the Arduino Pro Mini via some ribbon cable all over the place. And of course I do bring out the Arduino Pro Mini's programming interface here, so that I can reload firmware without having to open the case all the time. Apart from that, the switches are exactly the same as were in a GC-1005, although this is a multi-section switch because that's what I had. It doesn't have to be that complicated. You may wonder where I in fact got this case. This case does not come out of a GC-1005. That would be far too valuable, something to sacrifice just for its case. So in fact this comes from a GC-1007. The 1007, if you know anything about the Heathkit clocks, was a successor to the 1005. The 1007 is a rather pedestrian 4-digit VFD clock, in other words, a vacuum fluorescent green digit clock. It has a single IC, it has very few parts in it, but it does, of course, tell the time, and it operates as an alarm clock, much like the GC-1005 did. So it was effectively a far cost-reduced Heathkit digital clock that would succeed the 1005. I never built the 1007 myself, so this came from one of the 1007s that I acquired that was probably too far gone to restore or clean up. So I borrowed its case and made everything fit inside. One peculiarity of the 1007 is that it features fewer switches. So the 1005 has 4 bottom-mounted switches. The 1007 only had 3, so I had to carve out an extra space for an extra slide switch so I could duplicate the functionality of the 1007. That and some more taller feet, and because, well, yeah, it is an Arduino, there's actually a reset push button here, in case for any reason I want to reset it. And let's see. We should be able to plug them in with the covers off, and you'll get to see the LED display. So there goes the 1005, and there goes the 1007, which of course starts counting and sets itself. These displays are bright yellow, and just to take a look at the displays off the unit, and this is the bezel for the 1005. So here's the SP-352. This is our Panaplex dual digit displays. These were made a long time ago, are basically an obtainium. They came in several flavors. You could get them with 1, 2, or 3 digits. You could get them with symbols. You could get the +1 and 2 digits. But this is just the straight. Heathkit just used the straight 2-digit 7-segment display, and it would plug in as an array of pins here. This is a working spare, so I'm very careful with it. But again, so far these have lasted half a century, but nevertheless it's nice to have spares. The GC-1005Neo, on the other hand, uses Well, more modern displays in that they're LEDs, and these are yellow, not orange. And they're quite bright. And of course, you can, when you're programming it, you can set the brightness. The Max 72119 has a brightness function which lets you modulate the brightness of the display. These are not running at their full brightness. They've been calibrated down a little bit. But one of the things one wants to do when one's trying to replicate the GC-1005 is to actually match the displays as closely as possible, because the display, the SP-352, is really what makes what everybody wants in a GC-1005. The rest of it is not terribly interesting. Although the MOSTEC chip here is another piece of unobtainium, which was one of the very first single chip clock chips. Anyway, so these are 2-digit LEDs. These come in different colors. There's green, there's red, there's yellow, there's even orange, I believe. I picked these up from Mauser a long time ago. I believe they're still being made. They're 2 digits. Unfortunately for the wiring, each digit, these are common cathode, by the way, but each digit has a complete set of pins, so they're not multiplexed to each other, although we want them to be, because the Max 7219 does multiplex them. So it complicates the wiring because I have to wire all 6 of these in parallel. It would have been nicer if this module only had one set of multiplex pins, but such it is. So the other nice thing about this particular display is that the size of the 7 segments is essentially identical, and it's just about 15 millimeters. So the size and the angle is essentially the same. Now the digits are the lines are a little bit thicker. This one's upside down, decimal points on the bottom. But apart from that, it's the spacing is essentially the same, and so the size is the same, and these turned out to be very convincing substitutes. But how did I match the color? Because yellow doesn't match orange. So for that, and there's a reason I chose yellow and not red, because I figured, okay, how do I modify the color to more closely match the original SP-352? And as I struggle with this little thing off camera here, I'll show you. So the idea was to use some kind of gel material. In this case, this is it, but to pick the right color gel. So this is theatrical gel. This is what you'd put in front of spotlights or floodlights in a theater. And it comes in a huge array of colors. So I went to my local stage lighting store, and I got what amounts to the sample pack of literally every color under the rainbow times 100. And so the idea was to find which one of these gels, when put in front of that, most closely matches the Panaplex digits. And and you can get creative. Oh, there's plenty of different colors. Some of them are darker. There's neutral density ones. And in the end, after going through all of these, I found that this particular one created the closest match. And so that's exactly what you see here. And to protect it, there's just this little piece of acrylic. Now, could I have used, this is the original sort of neutral density front panel from a GC-1005. Now, could I have used a GC-1007's front panel and put the filter behind it? Because I didn't want to sacrifice a GC-1005 front panel. The GC-1005 front panel, you'll notice, is frosted, but has 3 little windows of clear. That's really what I want, but I didn't want to sacrifice one of these. So I had to, and unfortunately the GC-1005s who donated the case It's frosted, but only enough to fit. I don't have it here, but only enough to fit the 4 digits. So the rest of it would be frosted and not visible. So it turns out I did find the GC-1107's faceplate, and as you can see, it has a single wide window, which is of course wide enough for the 4 digits of the GC-1107, but not quite wide enough for the 6 digits of the GC 1005 or 1005 Neo. So this is what I came up with, which is simply a piece of clear acrylic in front of the theatrical gel. For now, it works as a prototype. If I ever buy myself a laser cutter, I would create this shape, and then which would fit more nicely in front. But for now, and this is really a prototype since this is perf board and this is kind of point-to-pointy wiring, it'll have to do. Since it's a little bit hard to see from the top down, here's actually the componentry that actually makes up the GC-1005Neo. So first of all, yes, everything in there was built on a tiny little breadboard. Pro tip, do not use these for permanent products or permanent prototypes as I did, because these contacts are not really made to be used indefinitely. Just set them and forget them. They do work, but occasionally you might have to reseat some stuff. Anyway, this stuff is simply plugged into a breadboard. It's run by an Arduino Pro Mini. Yes, I still use these for simple things like this clock. The time module is one of these so-called ZS04 Chinese modules. The important thing is they incorporate an Analog Devices or Maxim DS3231 real-time clock, which, if properly sourced from reputable vendors, is actually extremely accurate. This one is, but I've stopped using these cheap Chinese modules because simply they're just the quality of the chip that's on them is pretty worthless at this point. So as I mentioned in another video, I've started using the Chrono Dot, and just look it up on my other videos and you'll see why. Works much better. But anyway, this clock uses this questionable DS3231 as its time reference, and yeah, it's battery backed up with a 2032 lithium battery on the back. Finally, why do I show a 2N2222 transistor on this list? Because that's the only other really active component on the main portion of the clock, and I use this to drive the speaker for the alarm. And that's basically it. You will probably ask in the comments, hey, why don't you just use Wi-Fi and set it with an NTP server? And the answer is because I didn't want to dedicate an ESP32 or something with Wi-Fi to that function. Yes, I've built other clocks which set themselves via NTP. Or you might ask, oh, why don't you just use a GPS time? And say, yes, I'll have another version of a Heathkit most accurate clock, which I've built, replica, which actually uses a GPS module. But again, the point of this was simply to replicate mostly the functionality and the display and the form factor of the original GC-1005. But anyway, here's just basically the componentry I used. Again, the only other things in this particular GC-1005Neo is the tiny little AC power supply that you saw, and the Max 7219, which drives all the LEDs. By the way, if you are curious how to properly reattach the cover and screw these long self-tapping screws back into the case, this is the Fran Blanche approved method, because basically you're screwing self-tapping screws into plastic bosses in the lid, and what you don't want to do is to create yet another tap. So you put your screw in the hole, you use a manual screwdriver, and you back out the screw backwards until you hear a click. There we go. That means that the screw has found its thread, and now you gently screw it in and you will harm absolutely nothing. You will not create another thread, and in it goes. Repeat for all the other. And this applies to any time you're putting a self-tapping screw into plastic. Thank you, Fran Blanche. And just by way of comparison, here's the Heathkit GC-1005's original alarm sound. Notice there's no LED or any indication that the alarm is in fact set. It's simply the slide switch on the back. And here we go. So pretty much, I tried pretty much to duplicate the alarm sound. Of course, on the Neo, it's significantly louder, and we can, of course, we can snooze it or just turn it off. So we've set the GC-1005Neo's alarm to go off at 11:42. Notice the AM/PM indicator is on, even though it's programmed for 24 hours. And so now and we've set the alarm switch on the back, and so now here comes the GC-1005Neo's alarm sound. And we can snooze it just like we can. And so a couple of things. You notice some decimal points have lit up. By the way, the snooze lasts exactly 9 minutes because that's what the GC-1005 does. So 9 minutes from now it would sound again. There are a couple of decimal points lit up. The one on the far right is simply an indication that the alarm is set and ready to go off. The one just next to it, second from the right, means that we're in the middle of a snooze period. If I turn the alarm off with the switch on the back, which I'm going to do, those go off and we're back to normal. Reset the alarm for next time, turn the alarm off. So that's a little bit of added functionality. You can tell whether the alarm is actually set or not. In terms of the user interface for the GC-1005Neo, it exactly duplicates the 1005. We have 4 buttons here. There's a time setting here, which resets the seconds to 0, and then I use the hours. So now we're in PM, and by the way, I set this permanently to 24-hour mode, even though in the 1005 you can set it to 12 or 24 hours, or you can set the minutes, or if you hold both these momentary slide buttons, you can set the tens of minutes, and then you can start the clock at the exact top of the minute, and off it goes. The alarm, again, is nothing but the other slide switch, and you can set the alarm to whatever you want, but it's always going to alarm on the minute. And then in the back are the usual alarm on-off and snooze, which is a momentary switch. So it absolutely duplicates the functionality of the GC-1005. Of course, in addition to what you've seen, there's a couple of, obviously it's non-volatile. So if I unplug it and plug it back in, if it loses power, it resets itself to the current time, and so that's a big advantage. It will not alarm while power off because there's no real battery backup other than for the real-time clock. Before I built the GC-1005Neo, I actually created a prototype of it, so think of it as a prototype of the prototype, or proof of concept, and I used this one to basically as a software development mule, and also to just test out the displays, the whole idea. So this is actually built into a JNCO enclosure, which has some advantages. On the back, I replicate the function, all of the buttons and momentaries of the GC-1005, except I use push buttons and toggle switches instead of slide switches, and they're all obviously all on the back. And it uses a plug-in Woolwart standard, 9-volt DC power supply instead of an internal power supply. Opening it up, the JNCO enclosure is really nice because you can slide in PC boards and front panels and things and back panels, and it's actually a very flexible enclosure, even though it comes in several sizes, and this one's kind of oversized for what it is. So here's the inside. On the top left is the standard Chinese DC buck converter to give 5 volts to everything, and you see the switches and buttons mounted on the back. The displays are not the same as the ones I use in the GC-1005. If you look carefully, these are individual digits, which are just arranged closely together. They're not the double digits, and they're much older because it's what I had on hand. They still are cold cathodes, so they're driven exactly the same way by a Max 7219. But you'll notice the display board is basically a breadboard mounted on its side. Again, not something I recommend for permanent installations. The logic board is basically the same as what you saw. It's a slightly larger proto board, and it has a Arduino Pro Mini and the Chinese real-time clock with this DS3231. So all of that's basically, it's all electrically essentially the same as the 1005Neo, but again in prototype form. The bezel, the film is basically the same, although I went through several color variations to find what I hoped would be the perfect color. And this is actually more yellow than the orange, so it didn't quite match, but it's nice enough. And again, I really did this just for as a software development mule. And so basically this unit is still working. So you see it still has the same user interface. The software is exactly the same, and there's a little flat LED to represent the AM/PM indicator. So basically this unit still works perfectly, despite it being basically built on what I'll call a permanent breadboard. My GC-1005Neo was not my first attempt at replicating the aesthetics of the original GC-1005's Panaplex display. There have been several others. Here are a few. So on the far left here is the original Heathkit 1972 Heathkit GC-1005 Panaplex clock. Right next to it in the middle is 21st century Heathkit.com GC-1006. However, it has been modified to use the same yellow displays as my Neo, rather than the green or red displays that the new Heathkit still offers these kits with. That's still LED. On the far right is another attempt at creating the aesthetics of the Panaplex using those postage stamp OLED modules, in this case white OLEDs, but going through a proper filter. This replicates the thinness of the segments of the Panaplex, as well as the asymmetrical vertical arrangement of the center bar. It's slightly more towards the top than the middle, as in the original Panaplex, and it's quite successful. The main problem with OLED displays being driven this way is they have a rather definite and limited lifespan. But anyway, here's a few of the other attempts at replicating the Panaplex display.